We're going to be diving into a subject today that, well, it could feel pretty heavy, but it's definitely more important than ever to talk about, and that is image-based abuse. It's something that's sadly becoming increasingly common online.
Yeah, it's true. And we're here to hopefully help you understand this issue a bit better and give you the tools to protect yourself and your loved ones.
Exactly. We've all seen those headlines about revenge porn, right?
Mm.
And it always feels like something that happens to other people. But the truth is, it's a growing problem,
Yeah,
and it affects people from all walks of life. And in this deep dive, what we're uncovering is that it goes way beyond just what we see in the news.
it really does. Image-based abuse is such a broad term. I think a lot of people don't realize just how much it covers.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. What exactly are we talking about when we say image-based abuse?
Basically, it's any situation where someone shares or even just threatens to share a private, intimate image or video of you without your consent. And this isn't just limited to, explicit photos or videos or anything.
Right, it can be screenshots of messages, recordings of video chats, even things like deepfakes, which are pretty unsettling to even think about.
That's a great point. Deepfakes make it even more complex these days. And you're right, it's unnerving because even if it's not a real photo or video, someone can still create fake content to try to harm you, and that still falls under this umbrella.
It feels like technology just evolves faster than laws can keep up.
It really does. But the important thing here is that no matter what method they use, sharing any image or video that was meant to be private, even something as simple as a screenshot, can have serious legal ramifications. And if we all understand that better, it helps protect ourselves.
It's so important to really hammer that point home. Because imagine someone is threatening you, especially with something so personal. It's easy to feel powerless and alone.
And that feeling of isolation is often what the abuser is hoping for, right? But understanding why someone might resort to image-based abuse can be empowering in a way. We need to dismantle this idea that it's just about revenge and recognize the patterns of control and manipulation at play.
So it's not always an angry ex, is it?
Exactly. Sometimes it's a current partner trying to control you, or even someone you barely know online who is just trying to exploit you.
We hear about image-based abuse being used for blackmail all the time, which is terrifying.
Yes, and it can be incredibly insidious. Our sources highlight a few specific tactics used in what's called sextortion that are really unnerving. Are you familiar with catfishing at all?
Of course. That's where someone makes up a fake profile to lure someone into a relationship. But how does that tie into this?
Well, imagine you meet someone online, they seem incredibly interesting, share all your interests, maybe even seem to know some of the same people as you. It's all a facade.
Okay, so they build up this sense of trust.
Right. And once they have that, that's when they strike. They'll start asking for intimate photos or videos, usually with promises of reciprocation.
It's preying on that very human need for connection, which is even stronger online when you're feeling vulnerable or lonely.
Absolutely. And the worst part is that the perpetrator is counting on those very real emotions to achieve their goal, which is to control you.
Wow, that is chilling. So it's not always a complete stranger. You mentioned that sometimes they might use bombing to seem familiar.
Right. Bombing is when someone tries to basically infiltrate your social circle online. They might friend or follow a ton of people from your school or like your sports team to make it seem like they're a part of your world.
So you let your guard down because they seem less like a stranger, more like someone you might actually know.
That.
Wow.
Exactly. And it's a great reminder that online, you can't always trust what you see. This is deliberate manipulation, right? They need to gain your trust. And it speaks to a larger pattern in this kind of abuse, the abuser's need for control over the victim. They use fear and shame as their weapons.
That makes a lot of sense.
Mm,
Our sources also mention that abusers sometimes use hacking as a tactic.
definitely. This one relies on fear and intimidation. They might say they have access to your devices, accounts, or even your private information. Sometimes they'll even use an old password they found or mention something personal so it sounds more real.
So you start freaking out, wondering if your accounts really have been hacked. You mentioned the feeling of isolation earlier, but this tactic seems really effective at making someone feel alone and afraid, like everything is compromised.
Right, and that fear and uncertainty is paralyzing, which makes you more likely to give in to their demands. But here's the most important thing: never give in to their demands.
Even if it feels like the best option in the moment.
Especially then, paying them or giving them more almost never makes it stop. It usually just makes them demand even more.
So what can you actually do if you find yourself in that situation? So what can you actually do if you find yourself in that situation? It's easy to say don't give in, but what should you do in the moment?
It is easy to say, isn't it? Much harder to actually go through. The most important thing is to tell someone you trust. A friend, family, a counselor, anyone you feel safe talking to. You don't have to be alone in this.
Having someone to talk to in any crisis is just so important, and this is no different. Someone you trust to help you think clearly when everything feels overwhelming is so helpful.
It really is. But while getting support is so important, it's also important to gather any evidence that you can. Screenshots, usernames, URLs, create a trail.
So that if you need to report it,
Exactly. Report it to the platform where it's happening, whether that's social media, a messaging app they need to take action. And report it to the authorities if you need to. And eSafety here in Australia is a great resource.
our sources mention them too. They have a whole section on image-based abuse. So is that different from reporting to, say, Instagram or Facebook?
Yeah, so those platforms are really just focused on their own spaces, right? But eSafety can help you with getting content removed from multiple places.
Because it feels like once it's online, you've lost all control.
It can, definitely, which is why it's so important to report it, try to get it removed. It's about getting back some of that control.
Should you always cut off contact with the abuser? I mean, that seems obvious, but is it always the safest thing?
It's essential. And in most cases, yes, the safest. Block them everywhere, fix your privacy settings, make it impossible for them to reach you. In some cases, though, there might be safety concerns, so it's always best to talk to someone you trust, an adult or an organization like eSafety, to get guidance for your specific situation.
That's a really good point. There's not always one right answer when it comes to safety. It seems like being proactive about your online security is key, even if you haven't shared anything.
100%. It's like you lock your doors at home, right? You don't wait until someone tries to break in. Online safety is the same way.
That is a good analogy. Speaking of being proactive, one of the tactics you mentioned earlier, grooming, seems especially bad because it often is targeted at younger people.
You're right, it is a very concerning form of abuse. What makes grooming so dangerous is that you have an adult who is intentionally building a relationship with a young person with the goal of sexual exploitation.
And younger people are still learning about relationships and boundaries. It can be really hard to recognize those warning signs.
Exactly. It's a form of manipulation that can be really, really difficult for young people to even recognize, let alone escape from. It's so important to talk openly with young people about safety online.
We teach them how to be safe in the real world, so why not in the digital one too?
You got it.
Yeah.
We need to give them the words to identify red flags and trust their gut if something feels off, and to know that they can always reach out to a trusted adult if they need help, and keep having these conversations early and often.
Okay, so let's say the worst has happened. Images are already online without someone's consent. What then? It feels impossible to deal with.
First, just breathe. It is a horrible situation. You are not alone. And it is not your fault. The only person to blame is the one who shared those images.
It is so important to remember that it is not your fault. But practically, what can you do to feel in control again? It feels like once it's online, it's there forever.
Yeah.
It is so important to remember that it is not your fault. But practically, what can you do to feel in control again? It feels like once it's online, it's there forever.
It's a common fear, but it's not always true. Think about how websites these days have all these algorithms, right, to catch copyright infringement and things like that.
Right, like when YouTube takes down videos with copyrighted music.
Exactly. They're getting really good at finding and removing that content. And now, similar technology is being used to help with these images. There are services that can help you regain control.
So they create like a digital fingerprint of the image that can be used to flag it if someone tries to share it again.
That's the idea. Our sources talked about two in particular. For minors, there's Take It Down, and for adults, Stop NCII.
And those work across different platforms. Because trying to get something removed from every single website would just be impossible, especially when you're already feeling overwhelmed.
Oh, absolutely. It would be a nightmare. That's why these services are so great. They work more broadly to keep those pictures from being uploaded anywhere in the first place, on tons of platforms.
That must be such a relief.
Yeah.
To know there's a way to fight back.
It really is. It's about taking back control and hope, especially in a situation that makes you feel so powerless.
It's been a tough conversation, but so important. Image-based abuse is serious, but it doesn't have to define you. There's help out there, there's hope, and you can have a life beyond this. So if you're listening and this is you, please know you are not alone.
I agree. It's about getting your story back, remembering how strong you are. There's support, there are ways to fight back, and there is life after this.
That makes me think, we've talked about what to do after image-based abuse happens, but what about preventing it? How can we as a society make this kind of abuse totally unacceptable?
That's the million-dollar question. It can't just be about reacting afterward. We need a fundamental shift in how we talk about online safety, consent, respect. It starts with being open, talking about it, really educating people, and challenging those harmful ideas about power and, sexuality online and offline.
It's about making a world where everyone knows sharing those pictures without consent is never okay, and where people who are dealing with this feel safe to talk about it and ask for help without feeling ashamed. So if anything we talked about today resonated with you, please reach out for support. You are not alone. And until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe online.